Welcome to Fandom
and Wellness,
a podcast about the complex relationship between fandom and mental health.
Disclaimer, we are not psychiatrists or psychologists. We are just fangirls with a vested interest in mental health.
This episode, we will be talking about Pixar, specifically the portrayal of grief and loss in Up, Big Hero 6, Coco, and Inside Out.
Please be advised that we will be discussing the death of loved ones. The focal point of this episode will be on discussing grief within these four movies, not the films themselves, so we encourage you to watch them.
They're good.
Yes. So, I know we all watch these movies, and
yes,
have all cried during these movies.
Oh my god.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like that meme where it's like, no one, ... and then us. Let's do an episode on grief where we have to rewatch the four saddest movies ever. I don't know about the two of you, but I have been a blubbering mess rewatching these for the past 2 days.
I think they all films do a very good job of portraying emotions, specifically mourning and loss in them.
Yeah,
and
Pixar is very good at that.
Speaking of mourning and loss, I want to preface this saying that I don't personally think I've ever experienced it in my life. I can only speak to what I have seen in these films and how it's portrayed and the emotions that I felt watching it. When I watched Big Hero 6, I cried every single time that Hero lost his older brother, because his older brother was essentially the person that was the reason he kept going and the reason that he had got his inspiration to want to become an engineer.
Yeah, and they lost their parents at an early age,
right?
That as
well. So such an early age that Hiro doesn't even remember them, really.
Right, and so Tadashi definitely remembers,
yes,
and I'm sure that has impacted him a lot and probably kind of made him who he is, and like inspired him to create Baymax probably and become such a like a kind of like caring and
very
nurturing person, like with the desire to help and care for others as well.
Yes. Yeah, so like the impact of losing their parents is very different on the two of them. Just like I think Hiro probably has experienced like frustration throughout his life from just like not knowing what it's like to even have parents.
I will agree with you on that. I'm sure it must be hard not knowing who your parents are and knowing that they existed within your lifetime and knowing that you were not old enough to make lasting memories with them. And that must have affected him for a very long time, because even when you see the two brothers living with their aunt, Hiro's still partaking in very dangerous, illegal activity.
Right.
That I'm certain if he had a parental figure, and not to say that his aunt doesn't provide that, but she's running a business by herself and is single parenting.
And she also lost her, I think, either sister or brother.
Yeah,
right.
Whichever one of their parents was related to her. Like, she lost one of them, and she took on the role of raising them.
Yes.
And she's obviously still insecure about raising them and like being a parent.
Mm-hmm.
If we want to also talk about the other movies, losing like a wife is also extremely difficult.
Yes. Oh yes. I hysterically cried throughout that entire opening scene.
Oh my, yes.
Just like, I also really love old people. That movie is a nightmare for me because I love old people, I love children, and I love dogs.
Oh
so it's
God.
just like a combo platter of like yeah, but just like watching that opening scene, just watching him like have this like great joy in his life, and then it being taken from him, and then him having to like I guess like finish out his life without her, and she's like all he's ever known, basically.
It is. Ellie was not only his wife but also his best friend, and it was they started out as best friends, or friends that grew into best friends that grew into partners at a very, very young age. So I'm sure I would believe that she's been with him for around 60 to 70 years now. So that's a large chunk of your life to spend with somebody and then all of a sudden not have that time with them anymore. And part of me kind of understands Carl's
bitterness.
Not only his bitterness, but his reclusion from the world and how he isolates himself, because
absolutely,
she was his world, and when he lost her, he did not quite, it's like he didn't know what to live for. They had been saving their entire lives to go to Paradise Falls, and it seemed like when they finally had the opportunity to go, she passed away. And it was like, that was their dream to do together.
Yeah, and also, like, their house represents her, and so he's comforted in his reclusion by being in that house and being able to still talk to her. And, like he usually, when he's talking to the men trying to take his house, he says, like, our house. He doesn't say my house.
Right.
Like...
oh, man.
Yeah, so, like, that house is her.
Yes. And I will say, he's not only mourning the loss of his wife, he's also mourning, or maybe earlier on in the film, he was mourning the loss of an unborn child, because Ellie does have a miscarriage during their...
Is it a miscarriage, or is it that she can't get pregnant?
No, it was a miscarriage, because she got pregnant, and they were already building the nursery, and she lost the baby. That was very heartbreaking for me, especially in the political climate that we're in now, where miscarriages are demonized as a woman not doing 120% to care for this unborn child. Like,
right.
That's wild. Yeah, yes. I mean,
and not even that. I feel like miscarriages are something that's not, I don't want to say it's not normalized within our society, but it happens more often than people would think happens. And if there were more people that came forward with their stories, less mothers and less potential mothers or less pregnant people would feel alone if that were to happen, or at least know what to expect.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very painful experience. And I think they do a good job, like, showing her, like, just kind of, like, in, like, a little bit of, like, a depression state with, like, the breeze going over her face.
Yeah. Yes. I've had that feeling where it's, like, the depression, it hits you so hard that, like, the only thing you can do, or the only thing you can at least just try to do is just, like, go outside. And even then, that's just too much, physically and emotionally.
Yeah. Which makes me think of Sadness from Inside Out, actually, how she just kind of represents, I mean, she represents sadness, but, like, at times she literally will just, like, lie on the ground and have to be dragged.
Right.
Yes, that, but also when her and Joy interact, and it was like, what makes you happy, Joy? And it was all rainbows and sunshine and all these things, and then you go to Sadness, and it's like, well, what makes you happy, Sadness? And she goes, cloudy weather, rain, being inside, and those are normal things to experience and want to do when you are sad. And I think not to say it's a part of the package, but it's something that happens that you should acknowledge so that way you can move forward with.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't be happy all the time, and going through sadness or depression or grief are all different stages in our life that at one point or another we're all going to have to deal with.
Do we want to talk about the stages that are shown throughout these movies?
Sure.
Yeah.
Because Coco doesn't really... Coco deals with like, discussing grief in a very healthy way, but it doesn't necessarily deal with, like, the loss of a particular, like, person.
Right. I mean, it's more about, well, it's like a cultural thing of celebrating...
celebrating those that have passed away and acknowledging their life.
And the importance of actually remembering them.
Yes.
And celebrating them and telling their stories and not forcing yourself to forget them.
Yes, and I feel like I want to say that's the case in a lot more Americanized tradition, is just like moving on and forgetting, because in so many other cultures, you have to embrace those that have come before you, because without them, there would be no you.
Mm-hmm. Which, I mean, it would be, I don't know what word to use, ironic if in the afterlife there are no white people, because white people didn't celebrate their ancestors in a healthy way.
Oh no!
Which I kind of like when watching Coco, because I'm like, damn, this culture's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, that movie just in general is amazing.
That movie in general is amazing. It does
such a beautiful job showcasing that culture.
Yes, but even in my culture, which is Jamaican culture, we have a thing called a 9-night.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a celebration of life and death with the funeral and all that happens in between it for 9 straight nights.
What's the atmosphere like of that?
It's a very... Well, I will say it's somber. It's somber because you're mourning the loss of a loved one, and I've only ever been to one once, and it was when my great-grandmother died, and I had gone back to Jamaica. And I did not know her very well, but I know my mother loved her dearly. She was like a mother to my mother because she did grow up with her. But it's somber because you have the procession and then you have the funeral, but afterwards it's just like a gathering of friends and family, and it's kind of how they celebrate the Day of the Dead in Coco or in Mexico in other cultures, because you share their stories, you talk about the things that you've experienced with them. It's a large celebration and also a remembrance of those people when they were in your life.
I mean, white people are raised on guilt and taught to fear the afterlife, so it makes sense that we don't have a celebration, like a beautiful remembrance day like this.
Yeah.
So.
And part of me makes me wonder with that. I feel like it's just like a very Americanized thing, because I wonder what the culture is for mourning within European cultures that have very rich culture surrounding life and death, because it feels like in America you tend to America is a mixing pot of a lot of cultures, but how much of it is forgotten here?
Mm-hmm.
And I say that also within the African American community, because when they were stolen away from their homeland, how much of that knowledge of how they treat their dead was also forgotten.
Yeah.
But back to the stages. I was gonna say that in Big Hero 6, you see a very well portrayed different stages of Hero's depression after losing his brother, and it's not even before that you saw the self-destruction that he had just from not having his biological parental figures around. And then tying into the loss of his brother, his self-destruct behavior continues. He's still very angry. He's shown so much disinterest in school, even though he's been accepted into this college.
Right.
Yeah, he's not eating.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know that I've gone through periods of extreme depression and not been able to eat.
Yeah.
Right. And then it turns into anger, and which is directed at the...
Yeah, and a revenge scheme.
Right, yeah.
Yes.
And anger is such, I think, a big part of grieving, because people get angry at loss of control, right? Because you can't control what happens to your loved ones. And when there's a reason for why someone dies, of course he's gonna want to take revenge. But in the film, obviously, you can't, it doesn't reverse anything. Nothing changes.
I've never lost a daughter or son, so maybe I just don't know. But I did think that it was a little bit... I mean, I understand that it's a cartoon movie, but whatever. We're talking about grief. I think it's a little bit unrealistic that the professor would be so filled with anger that he would just completely stop caring about any of these students that he did care so much about. Tadashi died running into that building to save him, and he showed no remorse for that happening at all when Hiro confronts him. And I understand that he would feel so angry that he would maybe want to seek revenge on that I can't remember the businessman's name.
I know who you're talking about.
Who Hiro initially thinks
Yes.
is the one who stole his microbots.
Yeah.
Right, but I guess what they're trying to do is portray him as the antagonist
Yes.
of
I know, I understand that they're trying to portray him as the antagonist, but like
what can happen when your anger goes too far.
And I will say, I do disagree because when you, and again, this is me speaking not from experience because I don't have children, but I feel like he loved his daughter and he would do anything to get her back. And I think he realized his anger got to a point where he could not control whether she came back or not because in his mind, she was dead. The only thing he could control was whether he could get revenge on the owner of that company that created those unsafe conditions for his daughter to have died in his mind. So
I don't think that he wouldn't want revenge on him. I didn't think that was the unrealistic part. I thought it was unrealistic that Tadashi dying from him wanting revenge and him like being willing to like put all of his other students' lives in danger and be like fighting them in this way. That seemed unrealistic to me because like they are a similar age to his daughter.
Villains are never really that logical,
right?
You know.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this was me thinking he's only seeing through his anger. He's not seeing through the other emotions that he is capable of experiencing. So his anger has left him on a single track mind. And is ready to even kill if he must just to get revenge. And we see that in so many... We see that in real life. I'm sorry, I can't think of an example at the moment. But not even in real life, in just so many other films where it's like, revenge is the focus. And it's like, will it bring you happiness? Not necessarily, but not all villains get the chance to ask themselves that question or have that question posed to them. So he's also battling in one of the stages of depression and grief that he hasn't been able to move past with it either.
Right.
But speaking of like having those stages of depression and grief, what's important that was also portrayed very well within Big Hero 6 was that he had a support system. Maybe he did not necessarily lean on that said support system, and it took him a very long time before reaching out to them, but he had all of Tadashi's friends. He had his aunt. And they kept tabs on him, but they were constantly checking up and checking in and seeing how he was doing because Tadashi was a best friend to them, probably like a brother. So of course, by extension, they want to also care for his younger brother, Hiro, because he's not only lost his parents, he's also lost his brother. The only person he at this point really has in his life is his aunt, and it is a hard feeling to handle, and I will say that I have had that very same feeling. And I've had it over and over again. I've had it several times, and I will say having my family as a support system and having my friends has really helped. And I will say is if you are a friend and you see a friend that is dealing with these things or dealing with grief and loss, don't stop reaching out to them, because not to say you never know what could happen, but you reaching out to them is so important, and it's making them realize that, okay, there is somebody in this world that still cares about me, and that is very important. And I will say, Hiro finding Baymax at the time that he did, that was like another part of his support system.
It was very important.
It was very important, and I think as a character, we all love Baymax.
Right.
So,
he's the best.
Yes.
I do, so, like, I don't know about all the movies, but the two, Big Hero 6 and, Up, which are the ones that deal with, losing a family member, or, I don't know if losing is the correct term. I'm trying to think of, like, the most sensitive.
Losing is fine.
Okay. I've been told before that it's, that can actually feel painful to people, to lose that, to use that term, so I was trying to be considerate. But yes, those two movies are the ones that deal with like a death in the family, and both of them have like these moments of closure, which I think movies tend to get wrapped up in having, right? Because they need the ending to be feel good, and a really important part of losing someone that close to you, so losing it, whatever, of a really important part of grieving is that, like, you might not have a moment of closure.
I actually think that Inside Out deals with that very well, because in the end, Riley's the main character's name, right?
Yes.
Yeah, her her emotions, like the balls of memory, they become like mixes of colors because each memory is filled with anger and disgust and happiness and sadness all at the same time, you know? And they will always do that. It will continue to do that. Your memories will always be tinged with sadness when it comes to a loved one. So I think that's actually a pretty good way of kind of showing that there's no such thing as closure, because everything reminds you of loved ones, and any good memory you have of loved ones can be happy but are also suddenly sad.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, like, I mean, like, so, like, Baymax playing the videos of Hadashi creating him, like, obviously he's going through both of those emotions, like sadness and happiness, but it's also clear that that is when he's getting closure. And, like, in Up, when he's flipping through the book, and he finds, like, the photos of, like, what I want to do with my life, and it's like, oh, like, what she wanted to do with her life was, like, have this beautiful life with him. Like, that was, like, him getting closure, and then he let the house go. But, like, a lot of times when people die, especially depending on how they die, like, there is no, like, here's this book of me. Like, here's this video of me. Here's, like, you're just left with these feelings.
Yeah, and Hiro is lucky enough that Baymax is almost like a proxy for Tadashi, like, because it has so much of his, like, sweat and tears and hard work in him, and, like, obviously, like, the memories that you mentioned before. And he's also, I wanted to mention that he's also, like, this, like, objective observer of what Hiro needs. He can kind of he's able to, like, stand back and scan him literally and see what his emotions are, and, like, recommend things. But what he recommends are people, right?
Yes.
And that's a support system.
And hugs.
It's very important. And hugs.
But one of my favorite things is when Baymax learns how to fist bump, which is, like, something not in his programming, but it's, like, to me, I, like, read that scene as, like, he realizes this is something that made Hiro feel, like, a little bit better, even if it's just in that moment, and he, like, put it into his programming, and he kept doing it, and every time he did it, Hiro laughed, and it, like, cheered him up a little bit. So it's like, it was, like, this weird, perfect, like, moment of empathy.
Yeah,
that, like, like, this is a thing that the person who is going through pain wants to feel, like, wants to happen, and that's what will, like, cheer them up in this moment.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you on
because,
that.
like, a lot of times, like, when someone is experiencing loss, like, or grief, like, you're, like, you become so focused on trying to cheer them up, that you, like, aren't thinking about what their needs are, and, like, the fact that maybe they don't want to be cheered up, or, like, they just want to be heard, they just want to feel their emotions.
Yes, and to piggyback off of what you said about not wanting to be cheered up, there was that scene in Inside Out where Joy and Sadness and Bing Bong are trying to get back to
headquarters.
Her brain.
That place. Yeah, I was like, is it her brain? Where they're trying to get back to her brain, and Bing Bong is realizing that she's getting older and will eventually forget him. And that's him realizing that he is about to no longer have his best friend, and he's in a moment of grieving, and Joy is just like, everything is fine, just find a way to make this fun again, you'll be fine. And it's Sadness who kind of steps in and is like, do you want to talk about this? How do you feel?
Yeah,
and let him cry.
It's a really wonderful depiction of sympathy versus empathy.
Yes.
Like Joy is trying to force literally joy onto him,
Right.
but Sadness is actually giving him what he needs and hearing him. And I love. I'm looking at I'm just gonna say we write show notes for our episodes, and I'm looking at them, and you wrote the same exact favorite quote that I have, which is Baymax in Big Hero 6 saying, "It's alright to cry. Crying is a natural response to pain."
Mm-hmm.
He's like,
yeah.
I say it all the time on the podcast, like, I love crying.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of crying. Like,
and it's true.
People
it's
should
natural.
cry. Like,
yeah.
I do not cry as often as I should.
And sometimes when
I cry enough for both of us, maybe.
when you try to like bury your emotions, it just comes out in an explosion, right? Later on.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Like Bing Bong's candy tears.
Oh, yeah.
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 But,
yeah, and I love that like when Hiro finally like allows himself to feel his feelings and cry, like his friends don't require an explanation and they don't require an apology. They just accept that what he is going through is very painful, and they're just like, right. We are there for you. Just maybe don't leave us on a random island again.
Yeah.
Please and thank you.
Yeah, maybe. We didn't really ask to be superheroes, but we're here now, so.
One of them asked to be a superhero. Yeah, and like, I guess kind of going from that train of thought, the idea that we need sadness to experience happiness, because that's when we connect most with other people, right? Like, especially when Joy realizes that because Riley was sad, her parents and friends came to cheer her up and give her these happy moments. So sometimes it helps you bond with other people, and that in itself creates a happy emotion sometimes. And I was just I read something that said something like happiness is not the same as joy, because joy is like moments of like, like things, good things happening to you, while happiness is like contentment over time a little bit more. So happiness, having a happy life isn't not necessarily about filling all of your moments with joy, but about creating a life for yourself in which you are content with where you are and the experiences that you have. I think that's important to note.
That is an interesting way of putting things, and I guess like when you think about that, it makes sense. That does make sense to me, because not every single moment in your life is going to be joyous, but you can overall have a happy life, but you're still going to experience sadness and not have a sad life.
Right. Going back to Up.
Yes.
We don't talk much about support system that he creates for himself, or is forced upon him a little bit.
A very forced. You're my friend. You're my master.
But like, he's able to make new memories with a new support system.
Yes. And they're happy memories. They are joyous memories. A lot of them are scary.
Right.
But
like I said, happiness.
So which is, I think, a thing that people go through. Like, he basically has to feel like he has permission from Ellie to experience happiness again. Like, he doesn't, like, really accept, what's the little boy's name?
Russell.
He doesn't really truly accept Russell in his life until after that book. Like, until after flipping through the last pages of the book. He doesn't really, like, allow that dog to be his dog until flipping through the end of that book. Like, it's like as if he's like, to me it almost feels as if he's like almost like punishing himself.
Well, again, this is part of his, like, he's he's excluding himself from life because of the loss of his loved one, or because he's grieving Ellie.
Yeah.
Like, another emotion that people who are grieving experiences regret, right? And I'm sure he regrets not doing all the things that they could have done together before she passed away.
Yeah, and they show that in the scene where he buys the tickets right before she ends up, like, I guess, like, basically dying.
Yeah.
Like, he's like, oh my god, we still haven't done this. Like, I need to buy the tickets right now.
Yeah, and that's definitely super hard to deal with.
That is. And it's not even just Carl that's experiencing loss. Russell is also experiencing loss because his parents are divorced, and his father doesn't come around anymore. He even says it in the film that his father's girlfriend, his father's girlfriend told him he bothers him too much to stop calling. And in that moment I got so angry. And I think it's because I am a child of divorce, and I've grown to accept the situation that came about and why my parents split, but also understanding that, like, as a parent, it is your responsibility to sit your child, to care for them, to love them, to help raise them. And if you feel as though you got a divorce and that's your out, then you're a shitty parent. And I feel like that's what's happened in Russell's relationship, because he had this father. He had a father-like figure. He had someone he could look up to. He's even said they would go camping and fishing and all these things together, and then all of a sudden that experience is lost and he can no longer do that. Like that, like he is grieving the loss of his father. He doesn't have that figure in his life anymore, and it's hard to, he's trying to figure out a new normal for him.
Yeah, so that's kind of a concept that's touched on in this and in Coco, like, grieving someone who's still alive. Because, like, Russell is grieving, like, basically losing his father, who he never sees.
Yeah.
And in Coco, like, they're, like Coco herself is, like, going through dementia, and she is, like, forgetting her family. And, like, I mean, I don't know if either of you have had grandparents go through that, but my grandma did, and it is very, very difficult. Like, my grandma had dementia for the last 4 years of her life, and just, like, having this person that you remember in a certain way just, like, totally forget you, and you still, like, you and your family are still, like, taking care of them and everything like that. It's just very painful. So I'm sure that the abuela in that, like, I know, like yeah, like, she's, like, going through the family tradition of just, like, hating music and not wanting music around. But she's also probably in a lot of pain watching her mother forget who she is.
Yeah.
And then, obviously, Coco's father is going through pain because Coco's forgetting who he is, and he's fading away from the afterlife.
Yes.
Yep.
But yeah, it's an interesting concept to have to grieve over someone who's still alive.
Yeah, I mean, like, Coco's interesting because I really felt, was really interested in the struggle between Miguel and his family surrounding the subject of music, because I'm sure that we all have things that we fight with our family about that neither of us will budge on, right? And, like, I struggle a lot with my mom about a lot of things, but mostly about her telling me to do things and, like, just my independence, I guess. And so, obviously, I'm much older than Miguel, but Miguel is struggling with being told not to pursue this passion of his, and he does realize that there's nothing more important than family, but his family also realizes that family is more important than the past, I guess. I don't know, it's...
Yeah, I mean, like, this movie, like, the way that they deal with, I guess, the patriarch of the whole family, right, is by claiming that they want to forget him.
Right.
And that he's not there anymore, and they're doing all these, like, they're shoemakers now, like, they have nothing to do with music, because they need to forget him. But that's not what they're doing, right? Like, no one's like, no one's actually forgetting him. Like, he can't go back because his picture's not on the I'm sorry, I can't remember, the mantle.
Yes.
His picture is not there, so he is being forgotten because they don't, like, remember stories of him or what he looks like or whatever. But the rest of them, like, they don't really forget him. They're just trying to avoid him.
Right.
They're like, it's not actually, like, dealing with their emotions about it for them.
It's not a healthy way to deal with the emotions there. Like, they're avoiding important discussions that need to be had, especially
like, children are going to ask questions.
Yes.
Right.
If there's a literal face ripped off a picture.
Right. And I'm trying to say that with especially Miguel, who has such an interest in music, and knowing that his great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather was a musician, and because he didn't know who he was, and because the picture was missing, and because the guitar was so similar to, I believe, was his name Ernesto de la Cruz?
Sure.
Yes.
Are you sure?
Nope.
It's definitely De La Cruz.
It's definitely De La Cruz.
Okay, yes. So, because that is the same guitar that Ernesto de la Cruz stole, he then ends up believing that is his great-grandfather, and finding
a wild goose chase.
Going on this wild goose chase to find him, and realizing that he actually was the murderer of his actual grandfather. And it's like, it's unfortunate that the family did not know that their great-grandfather was murdered. But it's like, all of these are questions or things that they could have looked into and figured out, like, what happened to him, where did he go? But I will say that I am very happy that in the end he does find his great-grandfather, or his great-great-grandfather.
I don't remember. One of those.
It's one of them. Yes.
Yeah.
And
and in that, like, he gets a form of closure by being able to see Coco again.
Yeah.
Like after she
his
dies.
daughter, yes.
All these movies with their fucking closure.
You have to. It's a movie, yeah. But you know what? That's unrealistic. That their family saw his point of view. I'm like, bitch, my mom does not. She will not budge for anything.
Well, I guess it's because Coco started actually telling the stories.
Yes.
Once he played the song, or do you mean the Afterlife family?
Yes.
Both.
Well, I think that the only reason why the Alive family decided to budge was because Coco, the matriarch of the family, started telling her stories.
Right.
And so they're like, oh, okay, she says this, so now we can believe you, child. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And God. I think that even Mama Coco being able to tell these stories of her as a child of her father, the fact that the family is welcoming and open to believe it shows emotional growth from them, listening to her, but also allowing Miguel to pursue his passion, which is music, even though before they believed that music is what tore their family apart and why they had completely cut themselves off from that to begin with. And I think that's an important thing to acknowledge when you are dealing with these stages of depression and grief, is the emotional growth that happens when you start to acknowledge these emotions and figure out where they're coming from and talk about it.
Yeah, and in Big Hero 6, his whole revenge scheme is basically just a distraction from having to deal with his emotions, which I'm not a fan of telling anyone how they have to deal with their emotions, and especially someone who's grieving. If they need something to distract them, then I think that people should be allowed to have something to distract them, but in the end, your emotions do need to be
expressed.
Yeah.
Yes, they do. Just not even that. I kind of want to say in Inside Out, where Riley kind of has this entire plot to run away. These are still Riley's thoughts. Her emotions are still controlling her thoughts. And it was the moment where she's like, maybe this isn't such a good idea. maybe these, like, I should stay with my family. And, like, that's a growth moment, because she's realizing that what she was doing was running away from her problems, and that was not going to change anything. What she needed to do was talk to her parents and let them know how she felt. Like, she even said, you guys wanted me to be happy. And that is a large pressure to put on a child, to say, just stay happy for a little while. And she, like, even as an adult, to say that to another adult, it still is a lot of pressure. You might laugh it off, you might not take it so seriously, but as a child, hearing that come from your parent, it really puts the pressure on. Like, if I am not happy, if I am not in a cheerful mood, that everything will go wrong. And her realizing that that's not a good thing, and that's not healthy for her, that's growth.
Yeah, and her parents handle that really well, right? Like, they express that they also miss their previous home, and that like her feelings are valid, and this move has been hard, and so like it makes that memory like go from very sad to being also like feeling heard.
Yes.
Right.
And honestly, kudos to those parents, because parents are not always like that. And I will say, growing up, and it still to this day like frustrates me, and I think about it sometimes, is anytime I said or said what I needed, or said how I felt, it was just, you're so sensitive.
Ugh.
Oh yeah, I was called a crybaby all the time.
Yeah. And
that's not necessarily by my siblings as well. Not necessarily by my parents.
But I'm like, I am the oldest, and it's like I need certain things in my life. Like, throughout my entire childhood, I've always known myself to like silence, and just like to sit and quiet and have that. And I did not grow up in a silent family at all, and me not ever being able to have that took a lot on like my emotional happiness. So when I said, I just want to be alone, I just want these things, they're like, you're just being sensitive. And that's the switch where I realized, oh my god, maybe these people don't really care about the things that I need. Like, they're only making themselves happy, not me happy. Or there is no...
Some people assume that what you need is what they would need in that moment, and that's not true.
Right. Yeah, so I want to say kudos to Riley's parents. They weren't perfect.
Yeah, and before she even gets back home, like, the three emotions that are left in her head are basically like, we can't get her to feel anything, like, without sadness or joy being here, without like the full range of her emotions like being here, like we like she's like kind of hollowed out, like almost like like she's so burnt out on how she's feeling that she just like doesn't want to feel anything anymore.
And I've experienced it where you just feel empty inside. It's like you're not happy and you're not sad, you're just like, you're just alive, like you're just living and surviving. Like, those emotions aren't necessarily there.
Yeah. And do you want to talk about Carl's emotional growth and Up at all?
We did speak to him earlier about his emotional growth kind of came from his closure of finding that book that Ellie left and realizing that he's made a new family. Russell is his new family. Doug is his new family.
Yeah.
Kevin was part of his family briefly until Kevin had babies and had to take care of her babies.
Damn, those babies were cute.
Those babies were cute.
Also, I just need to express my puppies watch movies when I do, and these movies have so many animals in them. They were going out of their minds the whole time barking because they were like, anytime a dog or like a bird or something popped up, they were like so threatened.
When I was watching Up again, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot all these dogs were in here. And there was a brief moment, where I was like, oh man, they're all so cute.
Yeah, I had to pause it like many, many times until they would stop barking.
When they were serving all the dinner and the wine, and the guy, I forgot his name, the other explorer was like, yeah, that's a good wine. That's perfect for dinner. I was like, how long did it take to train these dogs?
A long time. As someone who has 3 dogs.
He had like 20.
But yeah, we were talking about like what the parents say to Riley and all that stuff. Like, can we talk about, like, I want to talk about like what we shouldn't say to someone who's grieving, because I think there's like a lot of misconceptions about what you should say based on like what Johnny was saying about how like people think that you need to hear what they think that they would want to hear in those times.
Like I said, I've never personally experienced this, but I did have an old coworker tell me that she hated it when somebody said, "I'm sorry for your loss." So I took that as, okay, you know, if one person doesn't like hearing that, then maybe there's a lot of other people that don't necessarily like hearing that. Because like you said earlier, saying I'm sorry for your loss might be triggering to a person.
Well, it's like the person didn't get lost, so that's why what I have read like is why you shouldn't really say that, which is why I feel bad that I've said it like a bunch of times in this episode. I know that like in relation to anything that I am feeling depressed about or super anxious about, when someone says I know, like, oh, I know how you feel, it drives me absolutely up the walls.
Yeah.
Like, because I'm just like, no, you do not.
Yeah.
Right.
I think when someone says that, it also bothers me. And that's why I also don't say that. I just say, I understand. I don't want to say I know how you feel, because I might not know what you feel. Like, everyone feels things differently. But I always say, I understand that. And that's just me acknowledging that information or that emotion that they're feeling.
Yeah.
So so I lost my dad 2.5 years ago, and it's interesting because I'm not necessarily thinking about how I don't really care what other people say to me, because unless they have lost someone of their own, I know they don't understand. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So if you say that you know how I feel and you have lost somebody, then that's fine because you have. But like it's hard to say that what not to say to somebody who's grieving, because everyone does experience it so differently. And I personally don't. I just said I lost someone because I lost them, and I personally don't mind that, but I'm sure other people do. So it's a little hard to say exactly, but I think as long as you are empathetic and genuine, I guess. As long as you're genuine in the way that you express emotion and you're caring, and just like there's nothing you can do. I don't know if there's a right way to do anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's the thing. Like, if you want to be helpful to someone who's grieving, you need to accept that like there is nothing you can actually. You can't fix this. This is not something you can fix.
Yeah, you can take. A lot of times, people will try to help you solve problems when they're trying to make you feel better. But this is not a problem you can solve. It is only something that will pass with time. Time is literally the only
healer
way. Yeah, the only way to heal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of people are very uncomfortable with having to give someone that type of time.
Yeah.
So they try to force joy upon them.
I think it's important to ask people what they want. Like, do you want a hug? Do you want to go out? Do you want whatever? And then they can tell you what they want, and you don't have to force anything on them.
Yeah. And sometimes they don't even want it. Sometimes they'll just want company. Like, I even had it this weekend. Like, I had been going through a lot, and like my apartment Like, you know, when you go through depression and you just don't clean and you're not taking care of the place you live, like, I had to reach out to friends and be like, I just want people to come over. Like, I don't want you to do anything. I just want you there so that way I can clean, because otherwise I'm not going to do it and I'm not going to want to do it. And that within itself was a hard ask. Like, it's hard to reach out to people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And obviously, like, the feelings of depression and whatnot that, like, you and I are discussing versus, like, grieving someone who close to you that has died is very different. And, like, I almost feel uncomfortable comparing them in the way that we are.
No. I fully acknowledge that there is no comparison, and I don't have that experience to speak to.
Yeah, we're just talking about the way we process emotions and the way we want other people to respond to them.
Yeah, like, I know that a lot of times, so, like, if someone, like Carl, for example, probably would have benefited from someone just coming over and sitting with him.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, not necessarily even talking to him. Just, like, reading a book next to him. Just because, like, that's what he's had his whole life, and it might have helped him, like, be able to continue on. Right.
I think we expressed everything we needed to about grief. Do we want to talk about anything else related to these movies?
Bing Bong being so empathetic towards Riley that he lets himself die so that Joy can get back to headquarters. It's like,
I was like, oh no, Bing Bong got snapped.
Bing Bong got snapped. Bing Bong allowed himself to get snapped for Riley. That is some empathy right there.
I did want to say that one of the reasons I love Big Hero 6 so much, and why I really wanted us all to talk about it, I think we all love Big Hero 6, was a Pixar movie that was, I think, probably one of the first Pixar movies that I had watched in a while that was, like, truly diverse. Like, we got a lot of things. We got a biracial family living in San Fran, Tokyo, in an engineering school where only white guy was Fred.
Who's a dumbass.
He served a purpose of being very, very rich and supplying everyone with what they needed. But, like, in the movie, everyone is so amazingly cool and intelligent, and they're all well thought out characters. Like,
and they're like different. Like,
yes, they're all different. There is no single way to be an engineer, to be nerdy, to be smart. Like, and I think that's what I loved so much about this movie, is because when you see in other films there's somebody that's really smart, they're just one personality. And it's the same personality that they all have, and it's that same trope. They're, like, cold and callous and, like, unfeeling, but they're super smart, they're genius, they're one of a kind, and I'm like, we're tired of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Doctor Strange. But
you mean, and Sherlock is his other character that is exactly like that?
Poor guy's been typecast. But yeah, and I think that's what I love so much about that film.
Yeah, I think all of these, well, I mean, Inside Out, I mean, they're, like, all, like, different colors. I don't know what they're supposed to be, but
Mindy Kaling was discussed.
What?
Mindy Kaling was discussed.
Oh, okay.
I mean, yeah.
I
won't say it had the most diverse cast, but, like,
sure. But, like, like Russell is kind of, like, the main protagonist. Like, Carl's the main character, but Russell's the protagonist.
Yes.
Right.
Russell is Asian American and a smart one. Kid knows how to use his bus fare. But he was like, it'll probably take 100 transfers to get home.
Yeah, and Coco has no white people in it. A+. A++++
yeah.
movie.
And I think that's what's so important about these films, is because they show they not only make it easier to experience other people's culture, they normalize other people's culture, because if I have to hear somebody say one more time that being Jamaican is exotic, I'm gonna slap somebody. But even still, you hear this in so many other cultures that is not specifically white or American, that everything else is just exotic. And I'm like, no, it's not. Like, I'm just gonna start calling ethnic white people exotic at this point, because, like...
Yeah, also a really great part of Big Hero 6 is, like, it's a diverse cast that doesn't draw attention to the fact that it's a diverse cast.
Yes.
So it's like, because a lot of times I can't say in Hollywood because it's a cartoon, but
it's
a lot
still
of times
Hollywood.
Like, sure, but yeah. So like a lot of times in Hollywood, like if there is like a black lead or an Asian lead, like they have to, like the whole movie has to be about that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of them just being able to play that role.
Right.
They're allowed to just be nerds. Like that's their role, is they're nerds.
Yes.
Like,
do you guys have anything else?
So like, also like you'll notice we didn't talk about Toy Story at all, which is Pixar's biggest movie.
What's that?
What's a Toy Story?
Yeah. Which does talk about grief, definitely. There are scenes in, but against Arkeida's wants and wishes, we're definitely going to do an episode on Toy Story.
I'll still talk on it. I'll...
Arkeida being the only person that I've ever met who doesn't like Toy Story.
Actually...
It's not that I don't like Toy Story, it's I don't care about Toy Story.
Oh my god. Okay, well guys, start supporting our Patreon so we can do weekly episodes, because maybe we're only going to do a Toy Story one if we switch to weekly and I can have a guest on it. If these two don't want to do Toy Story.
We'll still do it.
We can still do it. So we talked a lot about grief and loss, and if you want to find kind of resources to deal with that, grief and loss counseling are typically local, and there's no national hotline as far as we know. But if you are experiencing it, please consider reaching out or having a friend reach out to a local place. You can also find a therapist on Psychology Today. That's where I've found therapists in the past. You can find a therapist in your area, and you can find what their location, their specialties, their qualifications are, and even how much they charge. So that might be a really good resource if you're looking for a therapist and you're having trouble finding one.
I need a new therapist, so maybe I will check it out.
Yes, yeah. Me too as well. Thanks so much for listening. Please take a moment to subscribe, review, and rate us. It's the easiest way to help support our podcast. If you leave a 5-star review, we might pick it up and read it on the air.
Yep, this week's review comes from Rachel on Facebook. She says, I love the easy conversational style about not so easy topics. Tell me about it. It fills me with good feelings to hear people talk about real problems, real feelings while laughing. It's full of helpful tips and experience, and not at all judgmental.
I'm definitely judgmental of other white people on this podcast.
It's fine.
But
I balance
Rachel's
you
also
out.
a white person, so I guess she also feels the same. Yeah. So if you want to chat with us about the episode, or maybe suggest future ones, I don't know. Our social medias are Fandom and Wellness on Instagram,
Fandom and Wellness on Facebook,
and Fandom Wellness on Twitter.
And if you want bonus content, please join our fandom family at patreon.com/fandom and wellness for Patreon exclusive geek sessions.
And remember, be kind and take no shit.
Hell yes.
Bye.
Bye.
Good.